There is a brutal difference between people who work hard and people who build wealth. Most believe getting rich is a matter of effort, talent, or luck. But when you study men like Andrew Carnegie, you notice something deeper. There is an invisible rule, a rule that is almost never spoken publicly, a rule the wealthy follow in silence. And what's most curious, it doesn't look extraordinary. It doesn't involve magical formulas, it doesn't depend on supernatural genius, and it doesn't require being born into privilege. Andrew Carnegie was born in Scotland into an extremely poor family. His father was a handloom weaver who lost his livelihood with the arrival of industrial machinery. The family immigrated to the United States seeking survival, not prosperity. Carnegie began working in a cotton factory as a child. Later, he became a telegraph operator. He had no capital, no powerful connections, and no university education. But he had something few recognize as strategic. He understood how the money game truly works. While most people work for money, Carnegie learned early to work for access. Access to information. Access to the right people. Access to strategic decisions. This is the first layer of the invisible rule. The wealthy do not focus only on salary. They focus on positioning themselves closer to power. When he worked at the Pennsylvania Railroad, he wasn't just clocking hours. He was observing. He studied how investments were made, how contracts were negotiated, how executives thought. He began investing small amounts in the same companies his superiors invested in. Not because he had much money, but because he was learning the pattern. Most people ask, how much will I earn in this job? Carnegie asked, what will this environment teach me about the flow of money? That shift in question changes the destiny of an entire life. The invisible rule begins here. Wealth is built by understanding systems, not by executing tasks. Carnegie realized that whoever controlled steel would control the country's infrastructure. He didn't want to be merely an employee of the Industrial Revolution. He wanted to own the machinery that powered the revolution. While others sought security, he sought control of strategic assets. He vertically integrated his operations. He bought iron ore mines. He acquired transportation systems. He invested in technology to reduce production costs. It wasn't just ambition. It was structural calculation. He understood that real profit is not at the visible edge of a business, but in controlling its invisible layers. And here is the central point. The wealthy follow the rule of structural anticipation. They don't enter a market simply because it's profitable. They enter because they see where it is going. While many entrepreneurs celebrated short-term profits, Carnegie aggressively reinvested to dominate the entire supply chain. He sacrificed immediate earnings to consolidate strategic position. Most people don't do this because they want quick rewards. He wanted long-term power. There is something uncomfortable about this, because this rule demands cold patience. It requires giving up immediate applause. It demands enduring periods where it looks like you are earning less while you are building something greater. Most people cannot tolerate that silence. Another rarely discussed point, Carnegie did not accumulate wealth merely for personal consumption. He accumulated for scale, for multiplication, for acquisition. Money to him was a tool, not a trophy. The invisible rule has another layer. Those who become wealthy do not fall in love with money. They fall in love with the mechanism that generates money. Observe ordinary people. When they receive a raise, they increase their lifestyle. When Carnegie increased his revenue, he increased his productive assets. He expanded steel mills. He invested in innovation. He reduced operational costs. He transformed cash flow into structure. Real wealth is structural. There is also a powerful psychological component. Carnegie had tolerance for strategic discomfort. He made unpopular decisions. He endured criticism. He faced brutal competition. He negotiated with almost relentless firmness. Most people want approval. The wealthy want positioning. This does not mean lack of ethics or humanity. It means clarity of priority. Carnegie had a clear vision to build the greatest steel empire in American history. Every decision was filtered through that objective. Ask yourself honestly, are your financial decisions filtered through a strategic lens or through emotional impulse? The invisible rule requires high emotional control. The poor react. The wealthy calculate. Carnegie sold his company to J.P. Morgan for an amount that made him one of the richest men in the world. But what few people realize is that this sale was not luck. It was the logical result of decades applying the same silent rule: dominate structures before others recognize their value. After amassing immense wealth, he devoted much of it to philanthropy. He founded libraries, universities, and cultural institutions. Because he understood another rarely discussed truth: historical reputation is also capital. The invisible rule does not end with building wealth. It includes preserving legacy. Now think, how many people work for decades without ever learning the difference between income and assets? How many spend their lives seeking stability while others build control? What Carnegie understood was not just business. It was the dynamics of economic power. If you observe carefully, you will notice that the wealthy do not compete for salary. They compete for ownership. They do not seek a better job. They seek strategic position. They do not ask, how much does this pay? They ask, does this move me closer to the center of decision-making? This is the invisible rule almost no school teaches. And perhaps most important, it is accessible. But it requires deep mental transformation. It requires abandoning a survival mindset and adopting a financial architect mindset. While most chase money, the wealthy build systems that make money chase them. And that begins long before the first big opportunity. But there is an even deeper layer to this invisible rule that few people notice when analyzing Andrew Carnegie's trajectory. Carnegie didn't just understand systems. He understood leverage. Leverage is not simply using borrowed money. It is using resources that are not your own: other people's time, experts' knowledge, investors' capital, existing infrastructure, to accelerate growth without relying exclusively on personal effort. While most people work to multiply hours, the wealthy multiply influence. Carnegie surrounded himself with highly competent individuals: engineers, administrators, strategic operators. He didn't need to be the best deal technician. He needed to be the best structural strategist. This is another silent rule. Wealth is built through coordination, not isolated execution. Many people stall because they want to do everything themselves. They want absolute operational control. Carnegie delegated operations and retained strategic control. He created incentives for others to grow alongside him: equity participation, bonuses, internal opportunities. He understood that directed ambition is fuel. Another point rarely discussed: he constantly studied macroeconomic trends. He tracked railroad expansion, urban growth, and infrastructure demand. He didn't wait for the market to explode before entering. He entered when it was still uncomfortable to bet. Most people enter when it's already headline news. The wealthy enter when it is still calculated risk. That requires second-order vision. Ask yourself, when you make financial decisions, are you thinking about now or about the compounded effects 10 years from today? Carnegie reinvested aggressively because he understood compound interest not only in money, but in competitive advantage. Each technological improvement reduced costs. Each cost reduction increased margins. Each higher margin enabled new investments. This created a cycle competitors struggled to break. The invisible rule includes something fundamental: create cumulative advantages. It's not about winning once. It's about building a system where each victory makes the next one easier. There is also an almost cold discipline in how he handled capital. He avoided operational waste. He cut inefficiencies. He negotiated contracts with extreme rigor. He understood that margin is corporate oxygen. Many entrepreneurs fail not because of lack of revenue, but because of lack of structure. Carnegie mastered costs before he mastered headlines. And here comes an uncomfortable psychological aspect. He endured public pressure, strikes, criticism, labor conflicts. Regardless of one's moral view of those episodes, there is a strategic lesson. He did not make decisions based on momentary emotion. The invisible rule demands strategic composure in moments of chaos. When markets fluctuate, most panic. Those who understand the game see opportunity. Another important layer: he knew when to exit. Selling his company to J.P. Morgan was not weakness. It was cycle recognition. He saw market consolidation and chose to convert structure into liquidity at the right moment. Advanced wealth requires knowing how to build, and knowing how to close cycles. How many people cling to businesses that have already fulfilled their purpose out of emotional attachment? Carnegie did not cling to entrepreneurial identity. He clung to economic logic. There is a brutal difference between identity and strategy. He also understood reputation as an indirect financial asset. By investing heavily in philanthropy, libraries, universities, cultural institutions, he consolidated a lasting public image. That expanded influence and preserved his name in history. Economic capital can be depleted. Symbolic capital can endure. But perhaps the most invisible part of all is this: Carnegie thought in scale from the beginning. Even when he was small, he thought big. His early decisions were already filtered by expansion potential. Most people think small until they grow. The wealthy think big before they grow. And that completely changes the type of opportunity you perceive. If you think only about survival, you will see only jobs. If you think about scale, you will see structures. If you think short-term, you will see salary. If you think long-term, you will see equity. This invisible rule can be summarized in 4 silent principles. First, move closer to the center of decision-making. Second, convert income into productive assets. Third, build cumulative advantages. Fourth, think in full cycles, not isolated gains. None of these principles are clearly taught in traditional education. And that is why most people remain stuck at the surface of the financial game. The curious thing is that none of this requires extreme genius. It requires structured thinking. It requires discipline. It requires tolerance for delayed gratification. And above all, it requires abandoning the need to appear successful before actually becoming successful. Many seek external signs of wealth. The wealthy seek invisible control. The remaining question is simple and uncomfortable. Are you building assets, or merely buying comfort? Are you studying the system, or just participating in it? The invisible rule that men like Andrew Carnegie followed is not secret because it is hidden. It is secret because it demands strategic responsibility, and few are willing to pay that price. There comes a point where this invisible rule stops being merely a financial strategy and becomes a mental architecture. Men like Andrew Carnegie did not become wealthy simply because they were in the right place. They became wealthy because they operated with a mental model fundamentally different from the majority. Carnegie understood something almost no one verbalizes. The economic game is a game of position, not effort. Effort is abundant. Position is scarce. Thousands worked in steel mills. Few controlled the steel mills. Fewer still controlled the sources of raw materials and logistics. He wanted to be at the point where decisions altered the entire flow of the system. That is a brutal distinction. If you work inside a system, you depend on it. If you control critical parts of the system, others depend on you. That dependence is economic power. Another layer of the invisible rule involves risk perception. Most people see risk as something to avoid. Carnegie saw risk as something to price. He did not act impulsively, but he also did not remain paralyzed. He evaluated, calculated, and moved forward. While many waited for certainty, he moved with informational advantage. And here is something few notice: he constantly invested in practical learning. As a young man, he attended public libraries at night. He read about economics, history, and political philosophy. He did not seek only technical knowledge. He sought to expand his worldview. Because wealth is the result of decisions, and decisions depend on vision. If your vision is limited to your immediate environment, your decisions will be limited as well. The invisible rule also involves strategic networks. Carnegie did not engage in superficial networking. He cultivated relationships with people who were rising. He connected with mentors and investors operating at higher levels. He understood that proximity alters perception. If you surround yourself only with people worried about paying bills, your mind remains at that level. If you surround yourself with people discussing acquisitions, investments, and expansion, your frame of reference changes. Reference shapes ambition. Directed ambition shapes decisions. Another rarely discussed point: he understood the power of concentration. Many people diversified too early out of fear. Carnegie concentrated his energy on steel. He deeply dominated one sector before expanding. He did not want 10 average businesses. He wanted one dominant business. There is a radical difference between defensive diversification and strategic expansion. Diversifying out of fear fragments focus. Concentrating to dominate builds authority. When he finally sold his company to J.P. Morgan, it was not because he was tired. It was because he recognized a structural shift in the market, consolidation, and the need for even greater capital for global expansion. He chose to transform operational control into strategic liquidity. That decision reveals another silent rule. Know when your advantage is diminishing. Most people cling to the past. Strategists observe the future. There is also a complex moral dimension to Carnegie's story. He believed that accumulating vast fortune implied social responsibility. He wrote about this in his essay, The Gospel of Wealth, arguing that the rich should redistribute a significant portion of their wealth during their lifetime. Regardless of the criticisms one may raise, there is a strategic insight. He understood that extreme wealth without purpose can generate social instability. He thought in terms of legacy. How many people build money without building direction? The invisible rule also involves self-control. Carnegie did not flaunt wealth in the way many imagined billionaires do. He reinvested, expanded, consolidated. Only after securing his position did he direct capital toward philanthropy. First structure, then impact. There is a common mistake today. People want impact before structure. They want visibility before a solid foundation. But visibility without structure collapses. Another deep aspect, he accepted temporary unpopularity as a strategic cost. Difficult decisions create resistance. But he evaluated decisions by structural outcome, not by immediate applause. Strategic composure does not mean absence of emotion. It means a clear hierarchy of priorities. If your priority is approval, you avoid risk. If your priority is building something enduring, you accept tension. And here lies what may be the core of the invisible rule. Carnegie thought in decades. Most think in months. Some think in years. Few think in generations. When you think in decades, you accept sacrificing immediate comfort. You accept appearing slow. You accept that others may not understand your plan. But in the long run, strategic coherence beats momentary intensity. True wealth is the accumulated consequence of aligned decisions. And perhaps the most uncomfortable point of all, this rule is invisible because it is not glamorous. It does not involve magical shortcuts. It does not promise rapid rewards. It demands silent discipline. While many search for financial hacks, the wealthy build foundations. While many ask, how can I get rich fast? Strategists ask, how can I create something that continues generating value even when I am no longer present? That completely changes life's logic. You stop trading time for money and begin trading decisions for structure. You stop seeking validation and begin seeking competitive advantage. You stop reacting to the market and begin anticipating its movements. And then the inevitable question arises. If the rule is invisible, why do so few follow it? Because it demands extreme responsibility. It requires accepting that your current situation is, to a large extent, the result of your accumulated choices. And that is uncomfortable. It is easier to blame the system than to learn how to navigate within it. Andrew Carnegie did not change the industrial system. He understood how it worked and positioned himself at its center. Perhaps that is the final reflection. Are you trying to change the game? Or are you trying to deeply understand the invisible rules that already govern it? Because when you understand the rules, the game stops looking like luck and starts looking like strategy. But before concluding, there is one final layer, perhaps the most uncomfortable one, of this invisible rule that men like Andrew Carnegie followed in silence. It is not merely financial. It is existential. Carnegie understood that wealth is the consequence of utility at scale. He did not only think, how do I make money? He thought, how do I become indispensable to the advancement of an entire system? Steel was not just a product. It was the backbone of American expansion. Bridges, railways, buildings, infrastructure. By dominating steel, he positioned himself at the center of the country's growth. This is the final layer of the invisible rule. Extreme wealth emerges when you connect yourself to inevitable forces of transformation. He did not fight industrialization. He did not try to preserve the past. He aligned himself with the future. And that requires something rare, the ability to read the structural direction of the world. Most people observe events. Strategists observe trends. Empire builders observe historical forces. Carnegie was not merely selling steel. He was selling inevitability. And here is the most practical point for you watching now. If you want to apply this rule, you must begin asking different questions. Not, what is the best job? But, which sector is growing inevitably? Not, how can I earn more this month? But, how can I build something that increases in value over time? Not, how can I appear successful? But, how can I become structurally relevant? There is also a silent truth about discipline. Carnegie maintained an obsessive focus on efficiency. He studied costs with almost mathematical precision. He knew that a small advantage repeated over years becomes dominance. Most people abandon strategy because results do not appear quickly. But structural wealth takes time to become visible. For years, it seems slow. Suddenly, it seems inevitable. That is the logic of compound interest applied to life. And there is something even deeper. He did not allow identity to limit growth. He began as a telegraph operator. He could have defined himself by that role. He could have settled. But he did not see himself as a function. He saw himself as potential. The invisible rule also involves expansion of identity. If you see yourself only as an employee, you will act like one. If you see yourself as a builder of assets, you will begin to act differently. Everything begins with how you perceive yourself within the economic game. And then we arrive at the final point. The invisible rule that the wealthy follow in silence is not about money itself. It is about positioning, control of assets, anticipation of trends, strategic reinvestment, long-term thinking, emotional mastery. Carnegie did not wake up asking how much he had in his bank account. He asked what structure he was building. That mindset creates a cumulative effect that cannot be competed with in the short term. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson. Wealth is not an event. It is architecture. It is built when no one is watching. It grows while others seek distraction. It consolidates while many give up. And when it finally becomes visible to the world, it looks like luck. But it never was. It was rule. An invisible rule, followed in silence. Now the final question is not about Andrew Carnegie. It is about you. Are you merely participating in the system? Or are you learning to see the invisible gears that truly move the game? Because the moment you begin observing structures instead of salaries, assets instead of expenses, decades instead of months, something shifts. And when that shift happens, the game never looks the same again.